There was a prince who was the governor of the earth realm. Because this earth we live in is not the first earth. There was an earth that was destroyed before this earth was created. Because this earth we are living in is actually not a creation, it's a reconstruction. Because if you study Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, the Bible said, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And then in verse 2 it said the earth was void. It said darkness was on the face of the deep. And we understand why the earth became void. Because the first governor of the earth violated God, and so the earth was judged. And the way it works is that when an agent who is in charge of a domain is judged, the region is also judged. Because the region will naturally be a reflection of the character of the prince that governs the realm. And so when the first earth was judged, if you go to Jeremiah chapter 4 verse 23, you find what I'm talking about. So the earth was void. It's not a statement that first appeared in Genesis 1:2. When the earth was judged, when the princes that ruled the first earth were judged, the earth was also judged. And so God came back to reconstruct the earth. So Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 to verse 25 was a reconstruction process. Now that God has reconstructed the earth, he needed a new governor. And this time around, he wouldn't use an angel. And so the council of the Godhead came together and there was a deliberation. The Father was interacting with the Word, and the Word was interacting with the Spirit, and the Spirit was interacting with the Father. And the summary of that conversation is, we need another governor to rule the earth. And so when they went into the womb of wisdom, what came out was man. And so if you study Genesis 1:26, the Bible said, God said, let us make man in our own image, after our likeness, and let that man have dominion over this visible region that we are reconstructing. And so God sent man here as his agent to advance his will upon the face of the earth. And so man, and in alignment with other princes, once and again will appear before God in heaven. If you study the book of Job, the Bible said the sons of God appeared before God, and it says Satan also came, because he is now in charge of her. It's a constituency. So the first convocation of the ecclesia is actually in heaven. Here, regional guardians come back to give report to the King of Kings. But you see, apart from that ecclesia of the heavens, there are also territorial ecclesia. Because eventually, as the earth begins to diversify, you'll find that there are many spheres, there are many stratas, and there are many kingdoms. And God expects that his son may rule over those regions. And so the convergence of the sons of God on earth to advance his agenda is what we call the convocation of the ecclesia. And so when we are talking about ecclesia, we have gone beyond church membership. We are talking about citizens and legislators that come to sit at the gates, and the goal is to defend the interest of God and to advance the frontiers of his kingdom. That's the idea behind the ecclesia. Because when you study that word, its root meaning speaks of a people separated. And they are not just separated because they want to be isolated. They are separated because they are representatives of a group of people. And the idea is for them to propagate law that will regulate the culture and the operation of the people. And so the church happens to be the ecclesia that represents the idea of God. You know, it wouldn't have been such a complex thing, except that the first Adam didn't know that he was representing the heavenly government on earth. So other spirits were looking for how to have a place in the agenda that God was running on earth. And so when the devil came to whisper to him in the garden, he didn't know that he was opening the gate. And the moment he opened that gate, Satan came in, and he also took authority over jurisdictions and realms. And so now there is a contention. The ecclesia will not just represent God anymore. The ecclesia will also stop the agenda of darkness, so that the will of God alone finds expression in the visible realm. And so when we are talking about the ecclesia, we are talking about people who represent God's interest on the earth, so that their presence is the only reason why God's agenda can be advanced. If they are not there, it will be impossible to advance God's agenda. God initiated it in Eden. It was sabotaged by the rebellion of man, and God reinitiated it when Christ came, because the ecclesia must stand for God's agenda to be facilitated.